On the morning of 8th of December 1941, the Japanese forces dropped bombs on Kai Tak Aerodrome after the attack of Pearl Harbor. This attack was so sudden that it took the Royal Air Force by surprise, and the air defense was destroyed. The Japanese had an advantage having gained control of the air. The Japanese sent their troops to Shenzhen River and then marched to the new territories.
The cause of this was that the Japanese wanted power and wanted to take over the world, so they decided that the first step to their success is to invade China. The Japanese occupation of Hong Kong started when the governor, Sir Mark Young, surrendered to the Japanese on the 25th of December 1941 after 18 days of fighting known as the Battle of Hong Kong. To the people of Hong Kong, this day is known as Black Christmas.
During the occupation, Hong Kong was ruled by martial law. Martial law is when a place is ruled by military authorities and only occurs on an emergency basis, and is usually only temporary. Hong Kong was ruled by General Isegai Rensuke, who set up their command center at the Peninsula Hotel in Hong Kong.
The Japanese created new laws and rules. The government established a regulation that they will have control over all Hong Kong residents. After the fall of Hong Kong, 16,000 soldiers and civilians were captured and sent to camps in North Point, Argyle Street, Ma To Chung, Sham Shui Po, and Stanley. In 1945, severe cases of malnutrition among prisoners occurred in the Stanley internment camp.
In 1942, the Japanese outlawed the Hong Kong dollar and replaced it with Japanese military yen at an exchange rate of 2 Hong Kong dollars to 1 military yen. The exchange rate later changed to 4 Hong Kong dollars to a yen. As a result, the people of Hong Kong could exchange fewer notes than before, making them poor.
Hong Kong people walking on the street had to bow to the Japanese soldiers they came across. If not, they will get beaten up and soldiers would point to their rifle at them. In addition to this, the Japanese would sometimes come into people's house at random, and any woman that they found attractive, they would bring them back to their house and rape them. I was so scared my legs were shaking, especially my sister. She immediately put on my mother's clothes and applied dirty black stuff on her face, pretending to be an old, ugly woman. She was only 10 years old at that time.
Public transports failed, and buses, trams, cable cars, trains, and ferries returned to service. Unfortunately, there was a shortage of fuel, and people had to resort to riding bikes, tricycles, and rickshaws. Some of them even rode horse-drawn carts.
The Japanese reopened 2 of their banks, the Yokohama Specie Bank and the Bank of Taiwan, which replaced HSBC and 2 other British banks. British, American, and Dutch bankers were forced to live in a small hotel.
During the occupations, all schools were taught in Japanese. If a student didn't pass Japanese, they would be severely punished. The teachers also had to pass a test to teach Japanese. If they didn't, they had to complete a 3-month course. They were also taught Japanese culture as a major subject. The number of students shrank from 11,800 to 4,000 in 5 years.
The Hong Kong population before the war was 1,600,000, but the Japanese realized that it would be hard to supply everyone with food and other necessities. The government set up a repatriation committee within the Civil Administration Department to organize trains and ferries to transport large numbers of people to China. The population had reduced to 600,000.
The Japanese let people only have a certain amount of food. Those who were in possession of ration card were entitled to 242 grams of rice a day. In 1944, when there were less rice stocks, the government left the people to fend for themselves in the markets. Sugar, salt, cooking oil, vegetables, and meat had a low supply, so the prices went up. Poor people were only able to afford peanut bran, flour, and roots of trees.
Japan also occupied Singapore, Macau, Thailand, Malaysia, Brunei, Burma, and many other countries. They also occupied the Philippines from 1942 to 1945, when it was occupied by the Americans. Like Hong Kong, the Philippines was bombed on December 8, 1941. It took 4 months for the Philippines to surrender to the Japanese. One of the differences between both occupations is that the Japanese only occupied 12 of the 48 provinces in the Philippines, but all of Hong Kong.
A similarity between the occupation in Hong Kong and the Philippines is that the people were treated badly. Some of them were killed and tortured for random reasons. Like Hong Kong, this caused a significant decrease in population and also caused many broken families. The population decrease in the Philippines was 95.4%, but in Hong Kong it was 62.5%.
The surrender of Japan occurred when the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the 6th of August 1945 on Hiroshima and on Nagasaki 3 days later. The Japanese emperor surrendered on August 15th. The ceremony of surrender was held on September 16th in the government house.